Hello, everyone. On behalf of ADL New England and CJP's Center for Combating Antisemitism, thank you for joining us today for this important webinar. My name is Samantha Joseph, and I'm the Regional Director here at ADL New England. And we're here to discuss the findings from our latest report on anti-Semitic incidents across the country and in New England for the year of 2025. The report, which ADL released on Wednesday, shows that 2025 marked one of the most violent periods for American Jews since ADL began tracking this data in 1979, with some of the most violent anti Semitic attacks in recent memory. That includes the murder of 3 Jewish Americans, 2 in the Capitol Jewish Museum in May of 2025, and 1 who died as a result of injuries sustained in the firebombing attack in Boulder, Colorado. These are the first deaths of Jewish Americans since 2019. So even though overall incidents are down, as you'll learn in this webinar, we're very concerned about the violent nature of incidents as well as the increase in assaults and assaults with deadly weapons. In New England, we were encouraged to see a decrease in overall incidents as we did nationally, but the total still remains nearly double the recorded annual amount in the region prior to the October 7th terrorist attacks. So, as you know, my team in ADL continues to work very hard to address anti-Semitic incidents wherever we see them, in partnership with great organizations around our region who we're really glad to be joined with today. We've invited those community partners to share more details about the incidents they faced, how they navigated them, what supports were needed, and, just to bring to light the data, that we're going to share. So we look forward to this conversation. We're going to start by welcoming a colleague of mine at ADL Center on Extremism. And as we delve into these findings, we just want to, sort of remind people that each incident really represents a real impact on an individual and on a community. And we're so honored and proud at ADL to have a mission of combating anti-Semitism and all forms of hate through education, advocacy, partnerships with law enforcement. So even as we discuss, this really hard topic, I hope that you'll leave with a sense of hope and an understanding of how you personally can get involved in the fight against anti-Semitism. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rachel Sass, who's an anti-Semitic incident specialist at ADL Center on Extremism.
Everyone, my name is Rachel Sass. I'm the Senior Anti-Semitic Incident Specialist at the ADL Center on Extremism. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to share today some of the national findings from our audit of anti-Semitic incidents from 2025, which we released just earlier this week. Next slide, please. I want to start with our top line findings. In 2025, we tracked 6,274 anti-Semitic incidents. This means that 2025 was the third highest year on record for anti-Semitic incidents since ADL began doing this systematic tracking over 40 years ago. It was a 33% overall decrease from the record high that we tracked in 2024, but is still significantly higher than the levels that we were tracking before October 7th, 2023, 70% higher than the total in 2022, and around 5 times higher than the levels we were tracking a decade ago. Next slide, please. Thank you. 6,274 is a frightening figure. It's hard to wrap your head around. I want to emphasize that this is more than just a statistic. Each and every incident represents a real person or a real community impacted by anti-Semitism. The total for 2025 came out to an average of 17 incidents per day. So that means on average 17 times per day, we saw an Orthodox Jew assaulted on the street because of their wearing a kippah or other visibly Jewish attire, a student isolated or harassed by a classmate, a synagogue vandalized, and so many other iterations of anti-Semitism in the US. Each year for the audit, we break down by 3 main categories: harassment, vandalism, and physical assault. In 2025, we tracked just over 1,000 incidents of harassment, just over 2,000 incidents of vandalism, and just over 200 incidents of physical assault. This last figure, 203 physical assaults, uh, despite being the smallest category, is perhaps the most disturbing. For one, it was the only category that we did not track a decrease in last year. Incidents actually increased from the 196 that we saw in 2024. Next slide, please. And out of those 203 physical assaults, 32 actually involved the use of a deadly weapon. Next slide, please. This means that that for 2025, with a record level of anti-Semitic assaults that we tracked, it was one of the most violent periods for American Jews since we began doing this research. Next slide, please. These incidents of assault were exemplified by this disturbing events that we saw in Pennsylvania, in Washington, D.C., in Colorado. The arson of Governor Josh Shapiro's residence while his family was still inside. Thankfully, no one was injured. The shooting outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., of two Israeli embassy staff members, Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, who were murdered, and the firebombing of a peaceful Run for Their Lives walk, raising awareness for Israeli hostages being held by Hamas. In this case, there were several injuries, and one woman named Karen Diamond died as a result of her injuries. To put that 203 figure into historic perspective, and this is the highest level of physical assaults that we've ever tracked, it's 130% higher than the number of physical assaults that we tracked just 5 years ago. And as we've tracked in previous years, Orthodox Jews are often disproportionately targeted by anti-Semitic assaults. We found that 38% of physical assaults targeted the Orthodox Jewish community in 2025. Now, I started with a lot of really grim news from this past year, but I also want to focus on some of the areas of improvement, some of the areas where trends in incidents have gone in the right direction. You can see here that incidents at most location types decreased, and for many pretty significantly. We're still keeping our eye on incidents at K through 12 schools, which did not significantly decrease last year. They stayed at close to the same levels. But incidents in public areas, at Jewish institutions, and notably at colleges and universities decreased very significantly. And I'm going to focus in a bit on colleges and universities right now on the next slide. So in 2023, in the aftermath of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack against Israel, we saw a massive spike in anti-Semitic activity on college and university campuses, as you can see here. Moving on to 2024, incidents on college campuses reached their peak in the spring during the anti-Israel encampment movement, and again on the anniversary of the October 7th Hamas attack. In 2025, by comparison, we did see still some spike in activity around the anniversary of October 7th, 2023. But incident levels overall were significantly lower. They decreased overall by around 66%. I think this is a sign of a few factors. First, there were changing geopolitical factors like the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas that reduced the level of fighting, and therefore the level of news coming out of that region, sparking anti-Israel and related anti-Semitic activity. But also, I think it's a sign of some progress in efforts, including efforts from ADL to combat campus anti-Semitism. ADL released our campus report card starting in 2024, which held college and universities accountable for anti-Semitism happening in their communities, and also offered for those colleges and universities to collaborate with ADL to craft more effective strategies to combat anti-Semitism. So we hope that we're seeing some improvement from those types of efforts, and we hope that those trends will continue. That being said, anti-Semitism still remains at an elevated level on college campuses. They remain around 3 times higher than they were in 2021 before the October 7th attacks. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned this, of course, with trends on college and university campuses, this trend of Israel and Zionism and anti-Semitic incidents. Now, in 2024, for the first time, we found that more than half of all incidents had elements related to Israel or Zionism. In 2025, that figure reduced. Just under half of all incidents in 2025 contained these thematic elements, but that's still very elevated. For reference, before October 7th, 2023, around 10 to 15% of the incidents that we tracked would contain these sorts of elements. So this is still a major theme. And I want to also emphasize that when we're talking about Israel or Zionism related anti-Semitic incidents, we're not talking about political criticism of Israel or advocacy for the Palestinian cause. We're talking about situations where criticism of Israel or Zionism is used as a pretext to commit anti-Semitic acts. So, for example, in this image, you can see Gaza being spray painted on a synagogue. This isn't about generally raising awareness for the situation in Gaza. This is about targeting a Jewish institution. Next slide, please. Now, a lot of anti-Semitic activity did occur at anti-Israel rallies. These sorts of incidents decreased in 2025 compared to 2024, but there were still over 800 such incidents that we tracked last year. Again, not 800 plus incidents of rallies that were critical of Israel, 800 plus incidents of anti-Semitic messaging showing up at these sorts of protests. Messaging that is calling for confronting Zionism, conspiracy theories about Zionists or Jews controlling the media, classic anti-Semitic tropes like the anti-Semitic blood libel that Jews and supporters eat the flesh or drink the blood of their victims, as you can see in the center on top, and praise for anti-Semitic violence, support for October 7th, 2023, and for the terrorist groups and leaders that commit that sort of violence. Next slide, please. White supremacist propaganda is another category of incidents that we've been really concerned about for the past several years. And it's another category where we saw encouraging reduction in activity in 2025. There were still, again, hundreds of these incidents of white supremacist groups distributing anti-Semitic propaganda, denying the Holocaust, using anti-Zionist rhetoric as well in their propaganda, and hosting public events where they, displayed anti-Semitic messaging, as you see in the center here. Now, I talked a little bit about our methodology in terms of distinguishing between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism with elements related to Israel. And I want to stress that this sort of care and meticulousness we try to take to all of the review that we do of anti-Semitic incidents. We get thousands upon thousands of reports every year. We carefully review these reports, both my team at the Center on Extremism, as well as the regional office, such as the New England regional office. We make sure that we're not counting incidents twice. We make sure that each and every incident comports with our methodology, both for what counts as harassment, vandalism, and assault, our main categories, as well as what qualifies as anti-Semitism substantively. Um, we also believe in the value of transparency, which is why we post all of our data publicly on our website via the heat map. Um, we really appreciate all of the really, I think, community-wide effort that it takes to put together this data set. A lot of our reports come directly from victims of anti-Semitism. We also get a lot of data from both Jewish communal partners as well as law enforcement partners. And all of these different elements coming together, that's what makes the audit of anti-Semitic incidents the really most comprehensive picture of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, assault that I think exists out there in the United States. So I appreciate all of our partners, the New England Regional Office, and I'll pass it on from here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us and sharing an overview of what's happening at the national level and for all the hard work from the Center on Extremism. We're so lucky as a, Jewish community and the sort of broader community that the Center on Extremism is tracking these trends 24/7 and supporting victims of anti-Semitic incidents. So now we're going to turn to a regional data overview. um, to just give you a sense of what's happening in our area. Then we'll do a state-specific breakdown, and that's where you'll hear from our partners within each state. So, as Rachel shared, national incidents are down overall. New England follows a very similar trend, where we have a 37% decrease from 2024. But as you can see in this 5-year chart here, that still represents nearly double the number that we were at in 2022 prior to the October 7th Hamas attacks. So we're still in kind of a new normal around the high level of incidents, with this year representing the third highest year, since we've been tracking in 1979. So a couple of key trends in New England, similarly following the national trends, we had a decrease in college and university incidents, pretty significant in our region. From 151 last year to 49, primarily being driven by a smaller number of protests and encampments. You may remember that 2024 included the spring encampment time, which for campuses in New England, right, Harvard, MIT, and many others, was very problematic. We're also really proud of the work that the universities and our partners there have done to really enforce time, place, and manner policies. They're, changing their code of conduct, holding perpetrators more accountable. We released the campus report card in the spring, and 2 of the campuses in our region improved their grades. Northeastern getting an A for the first time, Tufts going from a C to a B. And so, we appreciate the hard work that schools have done to, really drive down incidents. And we're, hoping to continue to see that trend. In addition, another key trend in our region, which actually doesn't follow the national trend, is that K to 12 incidents actually went up, even though overall incidents are down. And, we see that reported. You may have heard just this week in Maynard Public Schools, they had 3 swastikas that just kind of hit the news yesterday and this morning. So we continue to see a lot of incidents in K to 12 schools that are getting, both reported to us by parents, by principals, and we've been doing a lot of work along with many partners, in the K to 12 schools. So that is a trend we're following really carefully, and we're continuing to do outreach and to make sure that the schools have the tools and resources they need. So to turn now to Massachusetts, following that sort of national and regional trend, Massachusetts incidents are down 36% from 2024. We had 279 total, the majority being harassment. Vandalism is the next category. And then we did have 4 assaults this year, which, of course, is a very concerning number given the severity of those. like the regional trend, we're still double where we were before October 7th, just to bring those numbers to light a little bit. So in Boston, continues to be the city with the highest number of reported incidents. So of all of Massachusetts, about 20% took place in Boston. And we continue to meet with the city of Boston and our partners there to help them understand what's happening and how we can best partner together to address it. We also have, very strong relationships with Boston Police Department, who we work with closely on incidents. Non-Jewish K to 12 schools, as I mentioned, that trend is very concerning. So that is the location type in Massachusetts that had the largest or most common number of incidents, and that actually put us third for all states in the sort of K to 12 location. We had 37 reported incidents on college and university campuses, down significantly, 65% from 2024. And last year, we reported that there were incidents in at least one incident in 108 cities and towns. So we did see, because the overall numbers decreased, we saw less cities and towns experiencing an anti-Semitic incident this year. But there are still 81 cities and towns across Massachusetts that had at least one incident. So, very concerning. I'm going to highlight a few examples and then I will turn it to some regional partners. So this was a very high profile incident. A brick was thrown through the window of our butchery, our kosher grocery store, which said Free Palestine. As I shared with the Boston Globe, when you say Free Palestine in a public space, you're making a political statement. When you write it on a brick and you throw it through the glass of a Jewish business, that is anti-Semitism. So, we're concerned about this incident and others that are similar. We're seeing, and we'll talk a little bit later about the targeting of Jewish businesses and what we can all do to support them. A swastika was drawn on a whiteboard outside of a student dorm room at MIT. MIT has had a few incidents this year, but one thing that is really good news, and I say this as an proud alumni of MIT, that the president's office has been very responsive when incidents take place, and has worked really closely with us and with other partners in the school to really make sure that she's doing what she can to address them. And then we had a Jewish, just to give you, some examples, so in our K to 12 space, one incident that took place was, the harassment of a Jewish high school student, who had students wave money in front of his face, and told him, said, some really horrible anti-Semitic slurs. And so this is just to like paint a picture of the different kinds of incidents we saw last year. And now I'm going to turn it to Melissa Garlick, who is an incredible partner leading this CJP's Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, who we work with on a weekly basis, as these incidents are occurring and in so many other ways. So, Melissa, I'll turn it to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Samantha, and thank you to ADL New England. As Samantha said, I'm Melissa Garlick. I lead CJP's Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, which we launched 2 years ago to work with partners, including ADL and many others, to rebuild a safety net for Jews across civic life in Greater Boston. I want to begin with a concrete example of what the data you're looking at felt like on the ground for our community. In January of 2025, law enforcement in Beverly arrested an individual who had been planning violence against Jewish community members. Police found guns and ammunition at his home and identified credible threats that he made towards synagogues and Jewish women. Acting on information shared between federal and local authorities, law enforcement intervened before harm occurred. An arrest was made and weapons were seized. And in the days that followed, the local Jewish community came together, convened at Temple B'nai Abraham in Beverly. Law enforcement, our communal security team, partner organizations, including ADL, and community members gathered to stand with one another, reaffirm care, and thank law enforcement for their heroic work in preventing what could have been catastrophic violence. That moment was deeply frightening, but as a community, we cannot allow fear to define us or to dictate how we respond. The data released by ADL reflects what many of us already know. Anti-Semitism continues at a historically alarming level, and we're continuing to grapple with the risk of physical violence. And here in Greater Boston, we're particularly concerned about the rise of incidents in our schools. At the same time, we see an overall decline in reported incidents, and we hold that carefully. We understand it as one possible indicator of an ecosystem in which anti-Semitism is met sooner, more visibly, and more collectively by leaders who are engaged, trained, and supported to respond. And the data makes clear that this proactive work must continue. This is where leadership and institutional action matters the most. Anti-Semitic harm rarely appears all at once. It escalates through normalization, isolation, and institutional hesitation. And our long-term safety will come from institutions and leaders intervening earlier, setting clear boundaries, strengthening norms, and building systems that can hold complexity without allowing harm to take root. That understanding has shaped our approach in Boston, and it is why implementing the recommendations of the Massachusetts Special Commission on Combating Anti-Semitism matters so deeply to our community right now. The work ahead belongs to a broad ecosystem: law enforcement, educators, civic leaders, community organizations, and partners like ADL, and it depends on sustained shared responsibility. Thank you for being a part of that work and for helping ensure that response becomes part of how our region functions, not only how it reacts in moments of crisis. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and for your incredible work and for all your colleagues at the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. We're going to turn it now to another partner in Massachusetts, Steve Schimmel, who is the leader of the Jewish Federation of Western Mass, of Central Mass, and we're really excited that you're here to join us to talk a little bit about what's happening in your region.
Wonderful, thank you. We operate on something that I will say tongue in cheek is the Mel Brooks principle. Hope for the best, expect the worst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Our catchment area, which broadly is defined as Central Mass, comes and presents itself with its own set of complexities, with some municipalities really well positioned to address anti-Semitism, the more urban areas, and then rural municipalities that really need the partnership that comes with Jewish Federation, ADL, and other law enforcement bodies. Since 2017, when we began tracking these incidents, we've had about 50 major moments where we've had to respond. And the creativity of the perpetrators really knows no bounds. It's been everything from vandalized billboards, speakers being shouted out of rooms on college campuses, chaos at City Hall. But within the past 15 days, we've had three pretty memorable experiences, harassing phone calls where our office was called a number of times. Our email was maliciously hacked just last week. And we had a strange circumstance where we had someone who self-identified as a member of the Jewish community showing up as an unwanted visitor at one of our congregations, who then went on to attack the legitimacy of the congregation and the rabbi blocking the entrance. So while the incidents really run the spectrum of necessitating a strong response, the great partnerships that we've developed have allowed us to respond in a very strong way. I also want to say that our own security and response framework was actually built out of the ADL Law Enforcement Committee. The head of our security team came out of that law enforcement group, and we continue to have great partnerships with local administrators, but in particular, our law enforcement partners. And I also think, lastly, it's appropriate to note that today being VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, let's not forget that our people sang Hatikva at Auschwitz under those circumstances, a song of hope. And as I mentioned before, we continue to be hopeful despite what we may be experiencing, and none of it would be possible without the relationships and partners that have been built over time. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much for your leadership in Central Mass and for our, the incredible partnership, as we work through these incidents and support and protect the Jewish community. We're going to turn now to the next state that we're going to talk about, which is Maine. And so to just give an overview, the Maine incidents were down, in a similar fashion to other states in our region, 37% from 2024, but remain actually almost triple pre 10/7 levels. So certainly concerned about the continued high rate. Some of the key takeaways, Portland, similarly to other states, Portland is one of the larger cities, had the city with the highest reported number of incidents. That was 12. One of the things we track is what percentage of incidents are related to either Israel or Zionism. And so in Maine, it was about 40%, which is following the national trend as well. Last year was the first year that those incidents were reported at over 50%. But, as incidents have come down, so has that share that are related to Israel and Zionism. And one thing we're very concerned about in Maine is the fact that 6 of those reports were targeted at Jewish institutions, where in 2024 we didn't target any incidents at Jewish institutions. Those were all threatening calls or letters. And I do want to clarify that there may have been, of course, threats to Jewish institutions in the past. They don't always get reported, right? And so, even as we're showing this data here today, we understand that data is, can be severely underreported, especially in states, where there's less Jewish infrastructure, around reporting. And so, but certainly, want to be supportive and work with communal security partners, the Jewish Federation, JCRC, and others in Maine to make sure that our Jewish institutions have the protection they need. And I'm going to turn it to a great partner on the ground in Maine in just a minute, who will tell us a little bit more about that. So just a few incidents that we tracked. There was graffiti on a public tennis pickleball court. Colby College professor and rabbi received a phone call from an individual who called the victim an expletive and an anti-Semitic slur. And a synagogue, as I mentioned, the targeting of Jewish institutions, a synagogue received a phone call from an individual, that yelled an expletive. You can imagine being on the receiving end of that, even though a phone call may not feel threatening, as Jewish professionals, who just want to serve our community, it can be very, threatening and difficult to be on the receiving end of that kind of call. So here I'll state New Hampshire, where we tracked 34 incidents, down 36%, following the national trend, and still, nearly double before 10.7 levels. To share a couple of trends, Manchester was the city with the highest number of reported incidents. In New Hampshire, we still tracked over 50% of incidents being related to Israel and Zionism, and there were 7 reported incidents at Jewish institutions, up from 2 in 2024. That included bomb threats, threatening calls or letters, and offensive literature distribution. So, wanting to make sure that we continue to support and protect our Jewish institutions. To just share a couple of examples, a Patreon front poster was posted in public with the phrase, "No Zionists in government, we serve one nation." New Hampshire continues to have a lot of white supremacist activity, as do other states in our region. A synagogue received a letter in the mail that read, "Keep killing starving children. We will come to kill you." Sometimes it's hard even for me to read these things that these synagogues are receiving. There was a swastika drawn on the floor of a Jewish student's dorm room at Dartmouth College. Important, this incident, really struck me personally. There was a Jewish business owner who was targeted, his bakery was targeted with a harassment campaign due to their service in the Israeli Defense Force. And we're so, proud of the Jewish Federation and all the incredible work they did to support this business owner. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how we can all do things, to support Jewish business owners who are being targeted. So I'm really glad now to introduce our partner on the ground, the executive director of the Jewish Federation of New Hampshire, Eric Martin.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Samantha mentioned, my name is Eric Martin. I'm the Executive Director for the Jewish Federation of New Hampshire. And as she mentioned, we've experienced anti-Semitic incidents from kind of across the gamut in terms of from white nationalism to anti-Zionism to on the left, far right activity, harassment campaigns, bomb threats, you name it. The one incident that I kind of wanted to draw attention to that I think kind of exemplifies what we've been dealing with is an incident that happened at our state house this past January when a representative attempted to introduce Holocaust denial into the work of New Hampshire's Holocaust and Genocide Education Committee. During a public state house hearing, a representative named Matt Thurborn, probably going to butcher his name, so I apologize, but not to him, Soborn Descharnay, I think, brought forward testimony from a gentleman named German Rudolph, a known Holocaust denier, along with other individuals connected to the Holocaust denial movement. The testimony tried to frame Holocaust denial as historical revisionism and argue that Holocaust education in New Hampshire could somehow include the perspective of deniers. There was even an amendment introduced that would have added a member of Rudolph's organization to the State House's Holocaust Education Committee itself. Thankfully, the amendment failed, but the fact that it was proposed at all was deeply alarming, of course. And I think what made this incident particularly significant was an attempt to inject Holocaust denial directly into public policy here in New Hampshire. I think for many in our community, it was a stark reminder that anti-Semitism does not always look the way people expect it to. It doesn't always come out in the form of swastikas or overt hate speech. Increasingly, it presents itself as debate, re-inquiry, or alternative perspectives. Air quotes and all that. Holocaust denial and minimization are often repackaged in ways meant to sound intellectual or procedural, but the underlying goal remains the same: to undermine historical truth, normalize anti-Semitism, and erode trust in Jewish history and lived experience. In response, the Federation of New Hampshire worked closely with lay leaders, trusted allies in the State House from both parties, and partner organizations, including the ADL, CJP, and agencies, to coordinate a unified response. Together, we engaged lawmakers and communicated the seriousness of introducing Holocaust denial to a state educational process. As part of that effort, we were able to successfully urge the House leadership, including both the Speaker of the House and Minority Leader, to publicly condemn the representative's actions and reaffirm that Holocaust denial and minimization have no place in New Hampshire's civic institutions or public discourse. The response, of course, didn't erase the incident, but it did demonstrate that when Jewish organizations, community leaders, and interfaith partners and responsible elected officials work together, we can draw a very clear line that between, legitimate public debate and the normalization of anti-Semitism. I think the broader lesson here is that anti-Semitism rarely begins with violence. More often, it begins with attempts to distort truth and test boundaries and see whether communities are willing to respond. In this case, New Hampshire's Jewish community and its allies did respond firmly, publicly, and collectively. And I believe that offers an important example of both the challenges we're facing and the kind of coordinated response these moments require from, of course, organizations like the ADL and all of our other partner organizations that we work with.
Thank you so much, Eric. Of course, it was so upsetting to see the Holocaust denial, making its way through the State House, and we're very grateful for your leadership to prevent that from taking root. Thank you. We're going to turn to our next state, Rhode Island, where we saw 26 incidents in 2025. As we said, underreported, but this is what we tracked for our audit. We had, 18 incidents of harassment, 7 vandalism, but I wanted to highlight there was one incident of assault in Rhode Island, which, made its way in the news, that, was very concerning, that we'll talk a little bit more about. These incidents are down 50%, so even sort of higher than the national average, but still remain higher than post-October 7th. Pre-October 7th. Some key takeaways: Providence was the city with the highest number of reported incidents. I worked yesterday to provide a report to the mayor of Providence, around what's been taking place in Providence over the last 5 years. And we're very lucky to have the leadership of a member of the Jewish community in that position. There were 9 reported incidents in Jewish institutions, up from 5 in 2024, including bomb threats, threatening calls, letters, and vandalism. And similarly, about 50% of the incidents continued to be related to Israel Zionism. Just to give you a few examples, we found there was a swastika found in a red spray paint on a sign on a public bike path. An individual in a passing car yelled anti-Semitic slurs at Jewish people who were walking to synagogue. And an individual, this upsetting incident where an individual said to a teenager wearing a Jewish star, which many of us wear, I'm wearing one right now, that their necklace was disgusting, right? And so, just to give some examples, and then I'm going to turn it to Emily, who will kind of highlight some of the other incidents that took place. Emily is the Director of Community Advocacy and Engagement for the Jewish Alliance of Greater Rhode Island and an and a great partner.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Gudrow, and as Sam mentioned, I am the Director of Community Advocacy and Engagement at the Jewish Alliance of Greater Rhode Island. The Jewish Alliance aims to serve our entire Jewish community of around 20,000. It's a center for Jewish life. We cover the entirety of the state of Rhode Island, and in our community, we serve as a JCC and the local federation. I'd like to start off by thanking ADL New England for their regular and crucial support they offer us in Rhode Island. We are grateful for their teamwork in addressing our shared concerns of anti-Semitism. I want to share a bit more about a handful of incidents referenced in the audit to offer a personal glimpse into some of these reports. One incident I would like to highlight that Samantha actually just mentioned, it garnered national attention, was when a Jewish high school freshman was involved in a hazing incident and anti-Semitic language was used during the event. Not only was the incident itself very horrific, but the school administration also fully diminished the severity of it and actually rescinded the initial repercussions for the perpetrators. With our local and national partners, including our local Holocaust Education and Resource Center, ADL New England, and AJC New England, we rallied together to hold the school accountable and advocate for the community. We organized a press conference with Jewish communal leaders, elected officials, and non-Jewish allies who stood with us to make clear that anti-Semitism has no home in Rhode Island. Subsequently, we turned out over 100 community members to testify at a school committee hearing and share how they had been impacted by this incident. We are very happy to have just welcomed an investigative report by the Rhode Island Attorney General's Office, which both confirmed the nature and severity of the incident and highlighted the required next steps of the school department to remediate said incident. In another community with a population of Jewish students, we received reports of 6 anti-Jewish events over a 3-month period, half being graffiti and half being student-to-student incidents, spanning from elementary to high school. We are currently working closely with that administration to create some long-lasting programs in the schools. Like many communities, we are seeing an increase in physical threats to communal institutions, including bomb threats targeting several of our local synagogues. Jewish community members continue to report an increased harassment in their day-to-day life, with incidents ranging from attacks on folks as they're walking to shul to anti-Zionist slurs being shouted at fitness facilities. Lastly, I would like to highlight that in addition to an increase in hate activity over the years, our own JCC had a violent and aggressive, seemingly indoctrinated person with Black Hebrew Israelite ideologies who came to our center, harassed our staff, and then proceeded to make threatening phone calls to said staff. As these events become more prevalent, it plays into an increased sense of lack of security and comfort in public spaces, work life, educational spaces, and daily synagogue life. We're very grateful to our partners at ADL New England, who are a constant resource and offer regular support while we navigate this uptick in anti-Semitism, community fear, violence, and the growing isolation the Jewish community has been feeling. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Samantha.
Thank you so much, Emily. And we're grateful for all the hard work that you're doing on the ground in Rhode Island, particularly in this past year, which saw, so many difficult challenges. I'm going to just speak to Vermont now. So incidents down similarly to the rest of the region, 34%, coming in at 29 total. So Burlington was the city with the highest number of incidents at 11. Vermont is actually the only state in New England where vandalism exceeds harassment. So we're actually, talking with the Department of Public Works and other leaders, particularly in Burlington, about the vandalism issue and how we can better support and track that. There were 9 reported incidents in Jewish institutions, up from 3 in 2024, including bomb threats, threatening calls, and vandalism. And we just wanted to note that outside of the audit, there's also been very, continuous challenges with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement and the apartheid-free community campaign, which also affect Maine and Massachusetts and other parts of our region. But particularly, we know that the Jewish community in Vermont really feels the impact of this movement. That city council meetings and others, are very contentious and threatening environments. And so we're working, closely with our partners on the ground to see how we can best support the community in navigating those challenges. A few examples: a synagogue received a letter in the mail, a incredibly upsetting accusation. An individual experienced verbal harassment when they were wearing a Star of David, and a swastika was carved into a computer at a high school, just to share some of the examples. And now I'm going to pass it to Yoram Samitz, who is the co-chair of the Shalom Alliance of Vermont, who will share just a little bit more about what's happening on the ground. So, Yorm, just make sure you unmute.
Thank you. I also want to add to the overall message that the other states have been providing, which is a more strategic relationship with ADL. But in order to do that, I wanted to just give you a quick snapshot of the differences in Vermont than in the other New England states. We're the only state without a federation. We're the only state that has not mandated Holocaust education in K through 12. Our Jewish population ranges between 7,000 to 10,000 people throughout the state, and we are supported with a dozen synagogues. And politically, we're probably the most liberal, progressive state of the New England states. And our representation and leadership by Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Peter Welch, and Rebecca Ballard really indicate the challenge that we have in Vermont as their very loud negative voice around Israel sets a platform for the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism that we have. Um, One of the areas that we have focused on over the past year is deepening our relationship with the legislature. This past spring, which maybe we're in now, hard to tell, we had the opportunity of working with the ADL and putting together a meeting with the Vermont Senate Education Committee. And that was a very revealing meeting of which we walked away with three very clear um, um, components. The first one was understanding um, how how powerful the anti-Israel advocates are. They attended this meeting, and although they didn't speak, they intimidated all the Jewish people who were at this meeting. But most importantly, the senators got to see this intimidation. Second, once again, it was reinforced to us the power of Jewish stories. The kids who spoke and shared their comments, their isolation, the need to hide parts of themselves, that was very visible to the senators. And it revealed a real underlying challenge that I think that we all have, and that is that non-Jews are just not aware of Jewish life. And a big part of what we're focused on is trying to get more people to understand who we are as Jews. And then third, data matters. Our participation in the hearing ended with the ADL presenting research that showed the impact of Jewish education in K through 12. And that data gave structure and credibility to the emotional truth the students had just shared. The student stories opened hearts, and ADL's data helped open minds. And ADL has been an incredibly important partner for us in Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was, so honored and proud to present at that hearing, and to talk about. So Vermont is the only state in New England without mandatory Holocaust education, which is a huge priority, for ADL and for Shalom Alliance of Vermont and other partners on the ground. And so we also very much appreciate your partnership. We want to, now that we've, had a chance to look at the data and hear from, folks who are doing this work on the ground, we just want to talk a little bit more about how do we combat anti-Semitism, right? What are the day-to-day, what's the day-to-day work of ADL? And then how can you all get involved? Because, of course, the picture that we're painting is very challenging, but it doesn't mean that there is not opportunity for hope and partnership and hard work in response. So at ADL, as you heard, from many of our partners, we're monitoring and responding to anti-Semitic incidents. We can't stress enough how important it is that you let us know what's happening in your community so that we can help and support you. We're speaking out, against the anti-Semitic rhetoric of our public officials and community leaders so that we don't have the normalization, that can lead to more incidents. We're providing education in schools and workplaces. We continue to work on our No Place for Hate program in many schools, as well as other trainings that are available for folks, across a variety of professions. We advocate for policy solutions in public and private sectors. You heard a lot today, from our state leaders about the different legislation that's been passed this year or things that we are working on. And we encourage everybody to get involved in legislative advocacy around these issues. We produce research on anti-Semitism and extremism, and an area in the last couple of years that's really become very important to ADL is litigation. So we'll talk about a specific example of that, but we are not afraid, to bring these matters to court when needed. So speaking of litigation, we wanted to highlight an example from Concord Carlisle, which is a high school in um, Massachusetts, that experienced a significant incident with one particular family. So ADL, on behalf of that family and student, filed a federal civil rights filing, which raised awareness with the Department of Justice of what was happening in the school district. The Department of Justice separately opened up an investigation that led to a settlement with the school district that, included things like mandatory training, monitoring, reporting. And so we were really glad that the awareness that we brought, and the specific case that we highlighted led to an overall settlement, between the Department of Justice and the school district that will really benefit not only all Jewish students, but all students at the school in order to create more accountability and safety. Um, Melissa shared a little bit about our special commission in Massachusetts. That's been such an important tool and resource. We just really wanted to highlight that. Many of you on this call probably attended committee meetings or testified in front of the special commission. This was over a year-long effort to really understand and hear from stakeholders across Massachusetts that led to a final report in December. We encourage everybody to read that report, full of recommendations for the executive branch in Massachusetts. We're really proud recently to meet alongside with partners with the Lieutenant Governor's Office, who's been charged with the implementation of the Special Commission report. And there's just going to be a lot of great work that will continue to take place as a result with the Department of Education, the Department of Higher Education, and so many other important stakeholders. Some of you may have heard a little bit about our Jewish Policy Index, which we launched last summer, but this is really a great tool that anybody can use to better understand what's happening in their state from a legislative perspective. We basically looked at all 50 states across about 20 areas of public policy that we think best protect Jewish communities, like nonprofit security grant program. We ranked every state. In New England, most of our states are sort of in the middle category, where they're doing some things to protect the Jewish community, but there are definitely areas of opportunity. In Vermont, we actually assessed it as limited action. So Vermont represents the most opportunity from a legislative perspective, but we encourage you to you can literally just Google JPI ADL and you can look at your state and really understand where the gaps are and think about how you can advocate in partnership with all the organizations you heard today for policies that will protect the Jewish community. And then to end, on what can you do, right? We need you in the fight against hate. It's not, our organizations can't do it alone. And we know that you all care tremendously about this issue and that you're doing great work in your communities already. So some ideas, to end today's call on. One is are celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month, right? So we have the great fortune of having it be May right now. And so like immediately following this call, you can, work within your town to request a proclamation for Jewish American Heritage Month. Ask your school and library to have some kind of celebration or exhibit for Jewish American Heritage Month. Meet with your state lawmaker. We've been sort of advocating for this in New England, and just this week we had the city of Newton mayor invited members of the Jewish community to his office, where he issued a proclamation and had a celebration. The city of Boston is going to have their celebration on May 18th, and just lifting up the Jewish community in this positive way this month goes a long way in the sort of overall fight against the normalization of hate. So I encourage you to get involved in that way. We want to talk about supporting local businesses. So we highlighted on today's call a couple of businesses that were targeted by anti-Semitic incidents. We had the butchery. We talked about the Dishon Bakery in New Hampshire. literally as soon as this phone call ends, I'm headed over to Michael's Deli in Brookline, Massachusetts, which was targeted just this week, with the anti-Semitic stickering. And we're going to be bringing legislators to that business to offer our support to the business owner. So on behalf of Jewish American Heritage Month, I hope that you'll support local Jewish businesses and let them know that they're not alone in facing some of the hate that they experience. Finally, we have a training called Effective Strategies for Combating Anti-Semitism that we would love to bring to your community. We were so proud to present that to leaders in Rhode Island, leaders in Maine, Vermont, and other places. If you belong to a synagogue, a Jewish ERG, a JCC, please ask ADL to come and share our research with you to help give you better tools for talking about this really tough issue. And finally, most importantly, report incidents to us. We don't want to come here next year and say incidents are underreported. We want to better be able to show your state leaders, what's happening in your community. So we just encourage you to continue to do that. All of these takeaways that we flashed on the screen really quickly, we will put in an email that we'll share today. So you don't have to worry about that, but just encourage you to stay in touch with us, stay connected to ADL. I want to end just by thanking so much our incredible team and staff who work so hard, in order to protect and support the Jewish community, particularly Sarissa Volin, who leads our incident response work, who leads the work on this audit, and just the incredible hard work that goes into it, but really the entire ADL New England team. I'm so proud to work with these incredible people every day on behalf of you and our Jewish communities. So thank you, and thank you to everybody who is really standing, in the fight against hate. We hope you have a wonderful day. Shabbat Shalom, and really look forward to staying in touch throughout the year.